there's two areas that we're going to talk about. You've got a priori and you've got a posteriori. A priori and a posteriori are two of the large branches, not the only ones, but two of the biggest branches of ways of thinking of ethics. Post and posterior, right? You see that? What's the difference between those two words? Before and after. Before and after what? Before and after the evidence, the outcomes, the consequences. The question is, can you tell if something is right or wrong before you look at the consequences? Is it wrong because of the consequences? Or is it wrong because it's, now let's say, inherently wrong? Under a priori we have, we're going to talk about Immanuel Kant. And a posteriori, we'll start off with John Bentham. Kant says, if you want to know if something is right or wrong, all you have to do, it's very easy, there's a few rules you have to apply. One of them is the categorical imperative. And he says, the categorical imperative is what you have to apply to any moral question. An imperative is something you must do. Categorical imperative is what? Something you must do every time. Number two, he says you treat people as ends and never as a means to an end. And number three, he says you act from duty. What is your duty? It's a good question. What is my duty? My duty is to what? To follow the categorical imperative. You must act in a manner such that your maxim can become a universal law of nature. Your maxim. What is maxim? A principle or rule. Well, what is a principle or rule here? The maxim would be the rule, which is you either always take stuff that doesn't belong to you, or you never take stuff that doesn't belong to you, right? Because it becomes a universal law of nature. What's a universal law of nature? Something that's always true that you can't control. Gravity. Universal law of nature, right? So, question, do you want to live in a world where every child must be born out of wedlock? Or would you rather live in a world that has every child must be born to two parents? Or any moral question, murder. Do you want to live in a world where you must, as a universal law of nature, kill innocent people? So he says it's very easy to determine what's right or wrong. And it's interesting because he talks about the Bible. You guys know about the story about Abraham and Isaac? Where they went up to the mountain where Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac, his son. And Kant says, well, no. God would have never told. And Kant was a theist. And Kant says, no, God would never tell any of his prophets or his children to sacrifice their children. Never. Because that would violate the categorical imperative. Interesting, right? So, that's how he says you look at any problem. And it's very easy to determine whether it's right or wrong. Now, we're going to talk about this in just a minute, is how far do you go with this? You can't start twisting it and bending it to the point where you end up looking at it as the end, as the outcomes. Because this is a priori. This is just an analysis. You don't care what the outcomes are. Next, do you treat people as a means to an end or as an end in themselves? Think about almost every crime out there. Almost every crime is treating somebody else as a means to an end. Right? Rape. What is that? Treating somebody else as a means to my end, my pleasure. Stealing something. Treating somebody else's labor as a means to get me something. You have no obligation to help anybody. Unless, there's always exceptions under the law, unless you have a duty to. Do you have an obligation to protect your child and to save your child? Yes. You have an affirmative duty. If your child falls in a pool, you can't just sit there and go, oh, look. Susie's drowning. Somebody else, you're at your neighbor's house and their child falls in the pool. Do you have an obligation to save their child? No, you can sit there and watch it drown. Totally ridiculous, but the law doesn't require you to do it. What if you accidentally knocked the child in the pool? You're going around, you turn around, boom, you knock the child in the pool, pulls and you go, oh wow, that's not my child. It's your child. Do you have an obligation? Yeah. If you knock the child in the pool, do you have a duty? So there are exceptions to the general rule. But what would Kant say? Of course you do it. You have to. Treating people as an end in themselves. What if I go to get my hair cut And aren't I treating somebody, the barber, as a means to an end? I'm using him to get my hair cut, right? Is that immoral? It's a mutual, it's called a contract. Contracts are perfectly fine as long as they're bilateral means to an end. If you ever have a situation where it's unilateral, that's immoral. You must act from duty, not with duty. He says the only way you know if you're acting moral is if you don't want to do it in the first place. If you wanted to do it in the first place, it still may be the right thing to do, but you haven't acted morally because you're acting with duty, not from duty. From duty means I had to apply the categorical imperative and do something that I naturally wouldn't have done. Let's say you have your whole life had a desire to molest little boys, and you think to yourself, I must act in a manner such that my maxim can become a universal law of nature. Do I want to live in a society where everybody must molest children? No, can't do that. So you say, as a result, I won't, and I never do. Have you acted morally? Yes. Kant says you've acted morally. You acted from duty. On the other hand, what if you think to yourself, molesting little boys, oh my gosh, and the thought of it makes you sick to your stomach and repulses you, and that's just, you want to just beat the crap out of anybody that does it because it's so abhorrent to you. And as a result, you never molest little boys. Have you acted morally? No, you haven't. Kant says that's not moral. You just have done what you didn't want to do anyway, right? You never had to overcome a compulsion to do that. You acted with duty. You see the difference? Over here, and you see how this is a priori. We don't care about the outcomes. You don't care about the outcomes in any of this stuff. This is all just a mental exercise. Bentham, on the other hand, is a philosopher who says it's easy to know what's right or wrong. The outcome, it's all about the outcome. You look at your moral dilemma, your moral question, and you say to yourself, what brings the most pleasure or the least amount of pain to the most number of people? And that's what you do. It is strictly outcome-based. You see that? Let's say you're hungry and you see a loaf of bread cooling in the windowsill of your neighbor's house. You literally live in some world where without this bread you may die. So let's say you're hungry. If you don't eat this, you're going to die. But the person you're taking the bread from has 6 kids, and if they don't eat the bread, they're going to die. Is it wrong to steal the bread? Yes. What, the most pleasure to the largest number of people. So what if I die? Too bad. Too bad if you die. The moral thing is to save the children. And you know that by you taking the bread, they will likely starve and die. After he said this, he had a philosopher that came after him who was one of his followers and that he taught, and his name was Mill. And Mill says, Bentham, he's a nice guy. He's old, though. He's kind of, gray-bearded, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And he's not young and smart like I am. I see things a little better. The reality is we are not rutting pigs. The rutting season is the mating season. Because it's not about the most pleasure for the most number of people. He said, we're not rutting pigs. There's higher things in this world. We're human beings. We appreciate Bach and Beethoven and fine art and literature. It's not about pure pleasure. It's about the most good for the most people. So, let me just give you an example now that you understand the two philosophies. Because this one is all about the outcome, and this one is all about the principle, before. It's all about the rule. Let's say you're in Nazi Germany, and you're German, and it's toward the late middle of the war, and the Germans have implemented already several policies and rules to gather up all the Jews, to put armbands on them, and they're starting to ship them off to camps. And you are washing the dishes, you look out the window, you see your neighbors, the Goldsteins. The Goldsteins open the door, they do some furtive glancing, and then they get the kids, they go, come on. And they lift up a bush, and the bush is on a hinge, and all the kids go underneath the ground, and they go down, and they bring it down, and the bush goes right over the top of this little trap door, and all the kids go in there, and they're gone. And you're going, Holy crap. Wow. About 2 hours later, a knock at your door. You open the door, and it's some brown shirt SS soldiers. And he says, we are here looking for the Goldsteins. Have you seen them? What do you do? Bentham and Mill would say, of course you lie. What harm comes from the lie? Nothing. What benefit comes from the lie? A family doesn't get taken off to the concentration camps. But Kant says you can't lie. The categorical imperative says you mustn't lie. You're acting from duty because you want to tell a lie, don't you? Yeah. You must tell the truth because you can't live in a world where you must lie, where all communication must be a lie. Could you imagine? But then some people go, well, yeah, but I want to live in a world where you must lie to save your neighbor. That's the rule. But then do you see how, if you say that, what are you building into the categorical imperative? What are you building into your maxim? You're building in the outcome, aren't you? You must lie to save your neighbor. How do you know that your lie is going to save your neighbor? You don't know that. You just think you know that.